Welcome into the Commanders Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today we have the latest Commanders injury updates on guys like Jayden Daniels, Marshon Lattimore, and Luke McCaffrey. Unfortunately, it's a triple dose of bad news for the Burgundy and Gold. Then we'll get into some trade candidates that the Washington Commanders can consider selling before tomorrow's deadline. But before we get into the content today, guys, there's a reminder here that tomorrow is the NFL trade deadline in the National Football League. If the Commanders are going to be selling players off for draft capital in the 2026 NFL Draft, now is the time to do so for GM Adam Peters. With Jayden Daniels likely out for the rest of this season and, of course, a 3-6 record midway through the year, my guess is the Commanders are certainly open for business. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel for our breaking news coverage here on the Commanders Report if and when a trade happens, whether it's a really big name like Laramie Tunsil or whether it's a lower-level name like maybe an Andrew Wiley. If the Commanders trade away any of their players over the next couple days, or if they even add a player for some reason, we'll have a breaking news video for you guys right here on the Commanders Report. So the latest on Jayden Daniels. Unfortunately, of course, he dislocated his elbow last night versus the Seattle Seahawks in a situation where he frankly shouldn't have even been playing in the ball game. They were down multiple scores in the fourth quarter. The game was already in hand for Seattle, yet Dan Quinn kept him in there, and of course snap, and now his season is likely over. Today he is getting an MRI to determine just how bad the damage is inside his elbow and in his arm, seeing if and what kind of fractures that there are in there and how long that recovery period is going to be. My guess is it's certainly going to keep him out for the rest of this season. Now, Adam Schefter posted this last night saying Commanders QB Jayden Daniels is expected to be sidelined indefinitely due to his dislocated left elbow, but it is uncertain whether his season is over, per sources. Now, in case you read that and thought there was a chance Jayden Daniels could play sometime at the end of this season, I'm going to spoil it for you. Jayden Daniels' season is over, okay? And even if, this is like not as serious as it looked on the field and he could theoretically come back by the end of the season, by that point, the season's going to be, far from over, or it's going to be very much over, I should say. There's only going to be maybe a couple games left in the season at best, and, the season's over. So, in my opinion, what you do with Jayden Daniels is you just shut him down. You make sure he gets his rehab all the way correct so that once we get to OTAs, training camp, all that stuff next year, he's going to be ready to go to lead this football team in 2026. This season is over. Right now, it's all about securing the future, and I think a big part of that is making sure Jayden Daniels gets back to 100% before he sees the field again. And unfortunately, some more bad news is Luke McCaffrey suffered a broken collarbone last night, and he is likely out for the rest of this season. That's really disappointing because the rest of this season is really about the young players on this roster proving their worth to this team moving forward. And, I think Luke was starting to do that, especially on special teams. He's one of the best kick returners in the league over the last 2 years. And then, he was starting to show some flashes as a receiver this year as well. So that's a big bummer to lose Luke McCaffrey for the season. Yet another player on this roster lost for the season. And I hate to break it to you guys, but we got another one here. Marshon Lattimore. It's now been confirmed that he tore his ACL, and he will be out for the rest of the season. And honestly, this will probably keep him out for the rest of his career. I think at this point, Marshon's had so many big injuries like this where, and he didn't play very well this year. I think that it's time to hang it up for Marshon Lattimore. We'll see if he ends up doing that. But at this point, coming off that ACL tear and the way that he played and the film that he put on tape this year, even if he does want to come back, I don't know what the market is going to look like for him. But his playing days in the National Football League may be over, and that's a little bit of a bummer there. But you do have Mike Samer still, and you do have somebody here on the outside, who's playing in the nickel and has been playing in the nickel this season that you can give a little bit of a tryout to on the outside. And you can try him outside just like you did last year, right? Benjamin St. Juste, Emmanuel Forbes, Michael Davis, those guys weren't working, so you put Samer still on the outside, and he played his best football of his career last year in that role. So now that this gives this team an opportunity here to pair Samerstill up with Trey Amos for the rest of the year and see if that can be your outside cornerback duo of the future. Because I think pretty clearly Samerstill is not a good slot corner in this league. He just doesn't have the chops to do it, and I thought he played a lot better on the outside. So last night versus Seattle, when Lattimore left the game. They actually kept Sainristil in the slot, and they put Jonathan Jones on the outside. I really hope that's not their plan moving forward. For me, it's all about finding the right roles for these guys heading into the future. And I think Sainristil is better served by playing on the outside for the rest of this season. Jonathan Jones is also inside versatile, so I would probably play him in the slot. Or frankly, I would put Noah Igbenogany back in that spot. He started there last year. And I could certainly see this team going that route if they want to do that moving forward. But just to put into perspective how bad the injuries have been for the Washington Commanders this year, and this isn't meant to be an excuse or anything like that, guys, but it's just a statement of fact how bad and how detrimental the injuries have been for the Washington Commanders this year. Nikki Javala from The Athletic said this today. It says, since the start of the regular season, 17 Commanders players have suffered injuries that have or will cost them time. Of those players, 13 were starters at the time of their injuries. So far, the team's total missed games to injuries is 59 and counting. So that is an insane number of injuries and insane numbers of games missed due to injuries. And you guys can take a look at the entire list of guys that have dealt with injuries this year, and most of them are starters, and most of them have missed a number of different games. And it stretches all the way from, the quarterback position in Jayden Daniels to wide receiver, where all three of your starters have missed time with injury this year, all the way to Austin Eckler, who has a season-ending injury, Dietrich Wise, Dorrance Armstrong having season-ending injuries, Javonte Jean-Baptiste as well. You're going to be losing now Luke McCaffrey and Marshon Lattimore for the season. Jayden Daniels will be out likely for the rest of this season. And, just plain simply, when it comes to injuries, this has been the season from hell for the Washington Commanders. And this was already a roster, in my opinion, that was pretty brittle in terms of, their ability and their depth to handle injuries. And, because now you take on all these injuries, both of your starting defensive ends, your quarterback, your number one wide receiver, all these different, very key cogs to the machine that would have led to hopefully, and what we hoped would be another potential, NFC championship run and maybe even potential Super Bowl run this year, just weren't there. And, we didn't get Jayden Daniels and Terry McLaurin on the field for more than 2 games this year. I mean, it was literally 7 quarters where those two were on the field this season together. And, you take on top of that all the injuries on defense and now the compounding season-ending injuries. This season is officially over here in Washington, and I hate to report that, but it's just the stone-cold truth, and I'm not going to lie to you guys here on this channel. But now it's time to face facts if you are GM Adam Peters, and it's time to sell at the deadline, okay? And coming up here on the Commanders Report, I'm going to let you guys know exactly what the strategy should be for Adam Peters in terms of which players they should be selling at the deadline this year. But before we get into some trade candidates at the trade deadline for your Washington Commanders, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And the Commander season may be over, guys, but your season can just be getting started with our friends at Prize Picks today. Keep the season rolling on Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Prize Picks is super simple to play. Just pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and if you get your picks right, you could cash in. On Prize Picks, how you play is up to you. If you want flexibility, choose the flex play where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you really know ball and you want the bigger payouts, go for the power play. No matter how you play, though, Prize Picks is a great way to put your takes to the test. Join millions of users and sign up for America's #1 fantasy sports app. So tonight, the Cowgirls take on the Arizona Cardinals on Monday Night Football. I am taking the more on Dak Prescott passing yards, the less on receiving yards for George Pickens, and the more on touchdowns for Trey McBride. So you guys can download the Prize Picks app today for free on your phone and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup on the Prize Picks app today. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. So I think the big question that needs to be on the minds of Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, and all the major decision makers in that Commanders front office over the next 48 hours, less than 48 hours at this point, is are we going to embrace a full-on rebuild, or are we going to continue to try and win in 2026 and beyond. Because obviously this year they took a win-now posture, adding veterans to try and help Jayden Daniels win a Super Bowl on his rookie contract. Okay, but now that a lot of the veterans that you have brought in or have kept on the roster are starting to fail physically, a lot of people in this fan base are hoping that the Commanders embrace a full-scale rebuild and maybe take a step back next year in order to take 2 steps forward later on down the road and give Jayden Daniels a sustainable level of success in his career at the Washington Commanders. But honestly, guys, it wouldn't shock me if they stay on the win-now path. They have multiple veterans on multi-year contracts on this team that they could theoretically keep in the future. And you can cut some of the dead weight, add some more veterans next offseason. You're going to have plenty of cap space. Something tells me that Dan Quinn and Adam Peters are not going to throw in the towel here. They're not going to completely, rebuild and, till you completely sell the farm here, even though that's maybe what I would do. Something tells me that they're going to continue to try and win in the short term heading into the 2026 season. And if you're going to stay on that win-now path, the next question that should be on their mind is which players, can help us accomplish that goal in the short-term future, all right? Not only which guys are under contract, but also which guys have the ability on the field to be legitimate starting caliber players and big-time contributors to a Super Bowl winning effort, potentially in 2026. And if you have guys, veterans on your team that you don't think can be contributors next year to a Super Bowl caliber roster, if that's the route you want to try and go take, if the answer to that question is no for some of these guys, like Bobby Wagner, obviously Marshon Lattimore is eventually going to be released by this team after this injury. But if the answer is no to some of those veterans, they need to either be traded at the deadline here or they need to be cut to make way for some of these younger players. And you have to give these younger guys, a bit of a tryout to see if they can be contributors to your roster moving into the 2026 season. But if you are ready to embrace a rebuild, if you're ready to kind of acknowledge the fact that this roster is not good enough to win a Super Bowl and you want to take a step back and accrue as many draft picks as you can and then inject this team with some young talent in 2026, you can certainly trade away some big ticket veteran items that you have on your roster right now, because let's face it, the Washington Commanders don't have a ton of especially early draft capital next year. You've just got a first-round pick and a third-round pick in the first 4 rounds of the draft, and you've got some additional picks on day 3, whatever, but really you get your starters on day 1 and day 2, sometimes early day 3 if you're lucky, and sometimes if you're really lucky you can luck into a Bill Krosky merit in round 7, but round 6 and round 7 picks are usually seen as lottery tickets, and obviously the lower those picks are in terms of round, the less likely those picks are to work out in the National Football League. So you could, in theory, trade away some of these bigger name veteran pieces under contract for multiple seasons if you want to rip this thing down to the studs and completely rebuild from the ground up. Now, some guys that are veterans that I would trade if you can. Quan Martin, younger safety, maybe you can get something for out of some team for him. He has been awful this year. Bobby Wagner also has been a huge liability in the middle of this Commanders defense. If somebody's willing to take him on, I am willing to let him go for pretty much any price tag. 7th-round pick swap for all I care, man. Then Nick Allegretti, the offensive guard. There's been some rumors with him being shopped by the Commanders and some teams having interest. If there's teams interested in Nick Allegretti, I am absolutely trading him away. But let's take a look at some of the more big-ticket items here that the Commanders have at their disposal to potentially trade away, and we'll start with left tackle Laremy Tunsil, who they traded for this offseason. Now, he's currently ranked as the 15th overall offensive tackle in the National Football League. He's still a good pass protector. He's still a good player. And, very rarely do you see legitimate, top 10, at least top 20 offensive tackles in the game be put on the open trade market. And because of that, a lot, and I mean a lot of teams could use a left tackle like Laremy Tunsil, especially if you're a team that's trying to compete for a championship and one of your big weaknesses is you don't have a top-end left tackle. There's a lot of teams that would be interested in a guy like Tunsil, who's been one of the best, if not the best, pass-protecting left tackle in the league for a very, very long time. Now, the Commanders have him under contract past this season. It's not like Tunsil's in the final year of his deal, so if they're going to try and win now in the future, Tunsil can still help them win. But if you're going to rebuild, do you really see Laramie Tunsil being around for the next 5-6 years? I don't think that they do. And if you guys remember here what the trade details were, I mean, you gave up a lot of draft picks, not only in last year's NFL draft, but also this upcoming NFL draft. You gave up your second and your fourth round picks to go get Laramie Tunsil. So if you're trying to rebuild, if you're trying to tear this thing down to the studs, I think you can trade Laramie Tunsil. You can maybe even get that second and fourth round pick back from a different team. That's certainly a possibility to me. And if that's the case and someone's offering me a second and a fourth for Laramie Tunsil at this point and I'm rebuilding, that is something that I am considering. But the only way I see Tunsil being traded, like I said, is if the Commanders are embracing a rebuild. And, Laramie Tunsil is only under contract for this year and next year. If they don't see him as a long-term, 3, 4, 5 year down the line kind of guy, it makes sense to trade him now while his value is still high and get a couple of extra, day 2 draft picks and maybe early day 3 draft picks in exchange for Tunsil's services. Another guy here that's a big ticket item that you could get some potentially day 2 or at least an early day 3 draft pick out of is Daron Payne, who's currently ranked as the 12th defensive tackle in the National Football League by Pro Football Focus. He's had a really good season to this point. He's had a big-time bounce-back campaign after having kind of a slower last 2 years after he got paid that massive contract during the Ron Rivera era. But I also think, kind of like Laramie Tunsil, Payne is a rebuild-only candidate, because if you're trying to win in 2026, Payne is still under contract for another year, right? So that's certainly something that I could see the Commanders hold on to if they're trying to win in 2026. But also there's the reality that he might be looking for a new contract next offseason as well. And do you really want to give an extension to somebody that's getting older? Do you really see Daron Payne as a long-term option for this team moving forward? Or would you rather trade him for maybe a late day 2 draft pick and use that pick to draft his replacement who could be here for the foreseeable future? It's just something that you have to think about. Then Deebo Samuel, I think, is another guy that, frankly, they should be shopping him right now. I mean, he's 29 years old. He's on an expiring contract. Are you really going to bring him back for another season at 30 years old? I mean, even if you're trying to win in 2026, does it make sense to pay 2 30-plus-year-old receivers big money? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, man. And with this season being over, if I'm the Commanders, I'm trying to get my return on investment back. When it comes to Deebo Samuel, I spent a 5th-round pick if I'm Adam Peters this offseason to get Deebo. If somebody like maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Buffalo Bills or one of these other wide receiver needy teams is offering me a 5th-round pick for Deebo Samuel, I think I'm taking that offer, plain and simply, okay? So I don't think that this team is planning on bringing Deebo back, and if that's the case and the season is over and both of those things are true right now, I think it makes a lot of sense to unload Deebo Samuel and maybe give Treylon Burks a tryout at his spot in this offense to see if he can play that quote-unquote Deebo Samuel role. And unlike Deebo, Treylon is 26 years old and could potentially be a longer-term option for this offense. Then Zach Ertz, okay? And, I think that this is more of a courtesy to Zach because I don't think the Commanders are going to get that much for him in a trade. He's pretty old for a tight end, and this is probably his final year in the National Football League. So I think Washington should try to do him a solid and get him to a contender. Or if there's a team out there that wants a receiving tight end that's really good, finding those soft spots and zones, all that stuff. I mean, he's Jayden Daniels' safety blanket, but Jayden Daniels is not going to be here for the rest of the year. So if this really is Zach Ertz's final season, and I think it is, I think, it would be good for the organization to try and find a suitor, get an extra draft pick on day 3, but give Ertz a chance to compete for a Super Bowl championship and probably his final year in the National Football League. Then maybe the most likely trade candidate for the Commanders here before the trade deadline is Andrew Wiley. There's been a lot of reports about teams being interested in Wiley because of his versatility. He can play right guard or right tackle. He's started at both very extensively throughout his NFL career. And because of that, and because, there's just not a whole lot of offensive linemen that are really available at the trade deadline usually, he becomes somebody that's a pretty valuable and maybe a very popular trade asset for the Washington Commanders, because usually teams, there's a lot of teams out there that could use an extra starting caliber offensive lineman or could at least use some offensive line depth, but there's not a whole lot of guys on the market that are like truly available that can be got for like a day 3 pick, right? And a lot of times you're going to have to pay a premium on these guys. But that might not be the case with a guy like Andrew Wiley, when maybe he can be got for a 6th-round pick or something like that. So I think that he's probably the most likely to be traded. Get another draft pick out of Andrew Wiley. He's not going to be here in the future, man. I think that this one makes a lot of sense for the Washington Commanders to get an extra draft pick next spring. So predict it for me down there in the comment section. How many trades will Adam Peters make before the deadline? It wouldn't shock me, actually, especially if they're planning on fully rebuilding this offseason. It wouldn't shock me if it's multiple by tomorrow afternoon. But let me know your prediction down there in the comment section. I would actually be a little bit surprised if the Commanders didn't make a single trade, but I guess that's a possibility. If I have to guess right now, I would say 1 or 2 trades, I think, is what the Commanders do. But let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. And that'll be it for today's edition of the Commanders Report. If we get more updates on Jayden Daniels, we're expecting results from his MRI any minute now. We'll get an update to you guys on the channel, probably in a short-form video. But make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Again, tomorrow is the NFL trade deadline. We're going to have extensive coverage of all the moves the Washington Commanders make right here on this channel. And until next time, guys, hail to the Commanders.